What's up, everyone? Welcome. We are live right now in the CannaBuzz community. And if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great episode for you today. We've got Larry from Decriminalize Nature. We're going to be talking all about entheogenic plants and mushrooms and fungi and all sorts of things. We're going to catch you up on how you can get involved in your community and change laws and just situations for the better, as well as just catch you up on what's going on and all sorts of things. But before we get too far into it, I need to give a couple folks some shout outs. First off, shout out to everyone in the CannaBuzz community. You're making this show possible. We've got a live stream that folks can join us in when we do these interviews. We do giveaways like of hats and things like that at the ends of our streams, and even give away things in our community. So join us over there. Search CannaBuzz in the App Store or go to cannabuzz.app and use the code GROWERSLOVE for 50% off your first month. You can join for as cheap as $4.20 a month, but your support helps us keep going, and we really appreciate it. Also need to shout out our friends at Lost Coast Plant Therapy. They're a really great company that makes a foliar spray that you can use to treat your plants in veg and in bloom, fight back those little critters that are trying to eat your plants, or the fungi that are trying to eat your plants, all those things that you need to keep off your plants. Lost Coast Plant Therapy is going to be there to help you. So look them up at lostcoastplanttherapy.com. And a huge thanks to Dirk for supporting the show. And then last shout out is out to TikiSeeds.com and Neptune Seedbank. Catch us up on what's happening with Tiki.
So Tiki has more of the Pablo's Private Reserve available at NeptuneSeedbank.com. And it's a really cool collab. We've talked about it a bit before. There's a few packs left. It's a Devil Driver by Pablo's Revenge. Do not miss out on grabbing those genetics. Definitely something you'll want to preserve. And also Tiki's doing his totally offensive Black Friday sale. And so he's got all kinds of great stuff. He's got 40% off the entire site, free pack of dealer's choice, means buy one, you pick a pack. And there's a free pack of lemon cherry runts with every order. So he's throwing it down for the totally offensive Black Friday sale.
Well, thank you so much to our supporters for helping us make this show possible. It's great to connect with Larry. We had him on, I think, about a year ago. So it's awesome to reconnect with Larry. Definitely check out that previous episode if you're not already. But if you're not familiar with Decriminalized Nature, we can kind of sum it up with a quote in here that JR put in. And it says, "It is time to end the war on entheogenic plants and fungi. Support the unalienable human right to develop our own relationship with nature." Where'd you get that quote, JR?
That was actually off the website. If you go onto their
Nice.
website and you go under the about, and I really thought that kind of summed up, the whole movement, because I'm sure it's only been within the last, probably 500, 1,000 years that, that we've even had any kind of hangups over that whole relationship with nature. Especially coming now to where we are. You would think as we're gaining more knowledge over time, it would be the opposite. We would have more access to nature, and we'd be able to find the things in our own environment that could help us internally, spiritually, medicinally, and dietarily. So I thought that was a really great quote. And welcome to the show, Larry. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, JR and Sam. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think the quote that you speak of there on the website is something that we've really been thinking about a lot, about what is our relationship with nature. Even the name of the organization, Decriminalize Nature, what exactly are we talking about? Why are we going decriminalization versus legalization? How do we provide the largest amount of access for the largest amount of people? And you see, I'm sure we'll get into this in the talk, but you see some of the different sort of varieties of policy that's coming out. And really, we wanted to focus on one that was going to allow for all different types of people to participate. So, for example, you wouldn't need a Mazatec curandera from Mexico to go to Oregon to offer mushroom ceremonies up there, and they would need to pay a $10,000 license to the Oregon Health Authority and do a year-long training. when they've maybe been doing this for decades and probably could do the training, multiple times themselves for the rest of the people that are there. So,
Yeah.
that's part of the legalization framework. You got to get these certifications, these licenses, all these other things, and it really sort of leaves out some people that have been doing this for a really long time that are probably the most professional and the most qualified to be doing this work. So with decriminalization, we're trying to really basically remove the criminal penalties, or maybe a better way to say, find ways to stop arresting people, so people can do the good work that they've already been doing.
Yeah, no, that's a great. We usually have a question that we usually start with, but I'd love to, if you feel like you need to expand upon that a little bit. I'd love to just touch on that, because you make such a great point that there's a difference between, we've been talking about cannabis at a federal level, and they've been using different terms, and then you guys are using the term decriminalize. Can you touch on a little bit about that and why that's important, just before we get into everything else?
Sure, yeah. So that's a big, and even for myself, I think it took, some time of really like thinking about this issue and working on this issue and seeing the different ways that it was coming out to really understand the nuanced difference between decriminalization and legalization. And most people think they're one and the same. But decriminalization is basically saying, let's just have it back the way it was before 1970, or as JR was saying, before the 500,000 years before that, of oppression of people that have been using these medicines, and maybe even further than that. You look back in, whether it's South America, whether it's Europe, whether it's Asia or northern, sort of Russia, that type of thing, different places that people have been working with these medicines that has been kind of squashed down, right? So really we wanted to say, let's remove the human element to this human need to penalize people or to create a system of sort of control or fear, or that
or ownership.
Ownership, exactly. So the decriminalization is basically say, let's start back before any of these laws started to criminalize our relationship with nature. And legalization framework, while in on paper it sounds great, okay, we're legalizing, this is legal now, but we don't have to legalize, I say this a lot of times, we don't have to legalize the sunlight, we don't have to legalize the air that we breathe, we don't have to legalize the water that we drink. These are just things that exist in nature, right? Same sort of thing. As soon as we legalize, now we're saying, okay, you need to get a certain license, you need to be trained by us, you need to have, in Oregon, they're even doing this thing, which are just, I think they're, for any of your viewers that are in Oregon, keep this in mind. I think you have 2 more days till November 21st. I don't know if this will come out by then, but basically, or this is live, I guess also, there's a Bill 303, which is coming out, which is about data collection. And so like even that, it's like, oh, well, we need to do this data analysis, this data collection. But what they're doing is they're recording your entire experience under the guise of safety between you and the facilitator. But now your entire experience is in the hands of the state as their data collection set, and so it's sort of like this thing where it's like, do we really need to be going into these, state run, state controlled aspects of our experience when it's this inner experience that we're having, when it's just about this healing, this personal healing, this personal growth, and we don't need to necessarily do that for research, because that sort of invades people's privacy, if you will, and then some of the most private moments of their life, which is their inner conscious experience.
And often that legalization is really just a carrot they dangle in front of you, saying, hey, we're not going to throw you in jail anymore, but we're going to hand your entire community and industry off to pay to play.
We're not going to throw you into jail anymore as long as you pay for our licenses and our insurance and our all, and you do our training. Everyone else is still illegal. But if you follow our process, then it's not. So yeah, so you're right. We're not going to throw you in jail anymore. Like there's this group called Symposia, talks about legalization being prohibition light, right? As long as you buy the certificate, you're okay. As long as you buy the license, you're okay. But anyone else is still a criminal. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Let's do that first. And if other models need to happen, and there needs to be more regulatory frameworks for certain people that want to do certain things, okay, that's fine. But let's start at the very base level, just remove those criminal penalties, and then naturally let things emerge. We don't need to there's this sort of need to everyone's about, oh, we need to scale up. But these are powerful medicines. We don't need to throw these medicines down and everyone's like, oh, we have 200 million people, 300 million people across the world that are suffering from depression. We need to get this to them immediately. Well, slow down. Let this emerge organically. Let people come across it on their own. Let people come into it when they're ready, and not say that, hey, because there's a lot of other issues that are causing depression. And sometimes you have a big experience, then you go back to your situation, which maybe is depressing, and you're like, oh, I'm depressed again. Have an opportunity to change some of those base issues. So really, we want to really make sure that as this moves forward, first and foremost, we stop arresting people for it. Then you don't have the government or pharmaceutical companies or whatever using the leverage of the law to force you to buy their product or force you to buy their $3,000 to $15,000 experience, which is what some of the rates are going for currently. think Australia, it's even like $15,000 to $25,000, which is kind of off the charts. So these are
And
things that in Oregon
I
you
mean,
just pick out of the ground.
to me, it's like they're victimizing people who are already at a most desperate point of their life. They're looking to have an absolute, you know, shift, a change inward. And so now they're going to monetize these people. And then here in Oregon, this is such a personable experience. They're required to do it under camera. So the rooms that they're having these experiences is are all being recorded. And I'm not going to be comfortable going through that process, that hero's dose, you might say, under the watchful eye of anybody. That just seems off-putting, very off-putting. Well, let's get to it, Larry. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about. So we always start off our interviews by asking folks, how they fell in love with the plant. But I think it would be good to have you go ahead and start off by telling us how you fell in love with the fungi.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and for me, falling in love with cannabis and falling in love with fungi were not too far apart from each other. This is kind of my earlier ages. It was probably around the mid 90s around then. Kind of started to explore, cannabis is really fascinating. This is kind of gives me a different sensation, gives me an understanding of this expansion of consciousness that people are talking about. I was very much more, when I studied my undergrad at University of Michigan, I was much more neuroscience oriented. So like everything exists in the brain, right? And then also I'm having these cannabis experiences, then later mushroom experiences, which is like, wow, this is so much more expanded than what I had read in my books or what I'm doing when I do the animal research, which was a bad idea anyway. So so it was really profound to me to kind of come across these plants and mushrooms that grow out of the ground, which is also really profound. Like here, these beautiful gifts all around us that come out of nature that can have these relationship with, or you can have these experiences from. So for me, I came across my first mushroom experiences probably in 1996 region, somewhere around there, 95. And, I think back about this a lot. I was, the people that bring you to the experience, you always remember those folks, right? Who really brought you to those big experiences. And I had a few kind of like lighter experiences that were more sort of, easily distractible because I was in the environment. I was walking around. I was like engaging with friends. I was, being in the, sort of hiking around and that type of thing, which is one way of doing an experience. But I met this woman named Phoenix, appropriate name, right? Phoenix.
Right.
She basically was like, no, you do this amount and you close your eyes. And that's a whole nother experience. And that kind of like blew my mind. And this was like right in my early days. So rather than going through many, many, many years of recreational experiences before I realized, oh, if I close my eyes, there's a whole nother journey here waiting to happen. That was kind of how we started. So this was when I was back at Michigan. We found that there was if how you have those fields with the tracks around them,
Yeah.
football field with track around it. For whatever reason, people's like sort of natural tendencies is to always walk around the track and never walk across the center of the field. So we found that if we laid down at the very center of the 50-yard line in the center of the field, nobody bothered us because nobody even knew we were there, right? So everyone would walk around the track. So we'd have these huge journeys looking up at the stars just in the middle. And for me, that was, I think, my introduction to the profundity or the size, if you will, of these mushroom experiences. And from there, I become much more interested in mushrooms in general. Now, I'm by no means a mycologist or even, that deep into it, but even more recently, I've come across like realizing like, wow, mushrooms for micromediation, mushrooms for neuroregeneration, mushrooms for all these other different types of things, for food, for culinary things, for bioluminescence, like all these things that these mushrooms do that are just so profound and amazing and beautiful. And even this movie Fantastic Fungi that's come out kind of shows you a little bit of all that, right? So I'm starting to learn a little bit more. When I was younger, culinary mushrooms weren't really a big thing for me. I could definitely do the psychedelic ones, because I was like, there's an end point to that. But I was eating a lot of yeah, exactly. I was eating a lot of button mushrooms and things like that. And now I'm like, wow, there's just between lion's mane, between chanterelles, between porcinis, all these different types of flavors, the butterbellows, the portobellos, all these different things. I went to this beautiful fungi festival in what is it, Olympic Peninsula up in Port Angeles not too long ago.
Oh yeah.
Beautiful up there, and people went like basically a mile from where they're having this thing to pick mushrooms in the forest, and there's like 40 or 50 different types of mushrooms that they had laying on the table that Alan Rockefeller, who's a big mycologist, was identifying a bunch of them, and a couple other folks were as well. So it's really just amazing to think like, you probably all know this, but we're actually more closely related to mushrooms than we are to plants, and
Yeah.
so long history that we have with mushrooms, and so you really sort of think about that when you have these big experiences. Like, what is this conversation? You get to these people that are really, really in the profound aspects of mushroom work. Talk about panspermia. And I really like to kind of play with these ideas, whether they're true or not, or whatever. They're all speculation, but it's really fascinating to think there's some people that speculate. I think maybe McKenna might have been one of these folks. Cohen EE definitely has speculated this, that mushrooms are sort of like an ancient technology. The spores can survive in space. So if somebody wanted to communicate information to another group out there in the universe, they'd send these spores out there and then have this sort of, the mushroom would be the technology of consciousness. And so people have been tapping into this sort of technology of consciousness, and then we can share these sort of inner spaces with this sort of other realms, And so it's always just fun to think about, especially when you get into these deep, large mushroom experiences,
Well,
with grams plus.
I thought it was interesting that you said that you were laying, kind of laying in the middle of this grass, looking up at the stars, and you're looking at the vastness of everything that's out there. But yeah, you were totally going inward. It was such an inward journey. And I think it's compelling that we have both of those really at the forefront of us now as humanity. We have the reaches of space, as you can see by the Ring Nebula behind me, that they just got a really awesome picture of. And then we now have the fungi and the fruits and the other entheogenic plants to take that inward journey. And I think that, at the end of the day, they call it the healing of the nations. And it can't come fast enough, in my opinion, really.
Absolutely. And, it seems like, when we really, and that's another thing about why we really are focusing on nature here, is that, yes, we talk about mushrooms. Yes, we talk about these other 4 categories, because they're basically 4 categories of plants and mushrooms that are sort of specified by the Controlled Substances Act, which would be, DMT, psilocybin, psilocin, ibogaine, and mescaline. So those are the 4 main categories. But then when you break that down, you're like, wow, there's, close to 100 DMT plants out there. There's close to, I don't know, hundreds of mushrooms that have psilocybin and psilocin in them, over 100 cacti that have mescaline in it, iboga, or ibogaine, they're finding now probably 4 or 5, maybe a handful of plants, and we don't even really know because we haven't been really exploring it. I think there's something close to 4,000 different combinations of DMT and MAOI that could create something like ayahuasca. And if we believe in these as being plant spirits or as being plant guides or plant teachers, that really means that we need to meet 3,980 new plant beings out there that we haven't even come in contact with. So, and what happens too is that you sort of get this overlap, this Venn diagram, where now, because I have this sort of theory that mushrooms will take you to your edge and maybe push you a little bit further than the edge. Ayahuasca kind of blows your edge out, or DMT kind of blows your edge out. Like, hey, there's a lot more here. And then the mushroom experiences I've been having after my ayahuasca experiences are much more like, ayahuasca is like, oh yeah, you know about this place over here. Well, let's go. And then I'm like, why does this feel like an ayahuasca experience instead of mushroom experience? So, and then they most recently just discovered with mushrooms that mushrooms also have beta carbolines, which are the MAOI inhibitors that you find in ayahuasca. So they have the psilocybin and the psilocin and the baeocystin and norbaeocystin of the tryptamines. But then they have these beta carbolines, which can come in, which will actually modulate the effects of the DMT by helping to reduce the metabolites in the belly, so they don't get broken down quite in the same way. So that's also really fascinating. There is this sort of interesting biochemical interaction or relationship that all these plants have.
But something else I'm noticing too in fungi and in other is like within cannabis, the genetic expressions create their own unique chemistry. And I would say across the board with the mushroom, the fruiting bodies of the fungi, it may be psilocybin and psilocin that we're modulating, but each of them offer a slightly different experience and a different chemistry. And I think we're just now going to start really being able to tap into some of that and start seeing where some of these are really specifically good for this specific thing, or this one might be really good for this specific thing. And I think as our relationship with nature, if we have the opportunity to do so with the science that we have, I think it's limitless as to what we can accomplish within the medical, dietary, and spiritual world that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I would say would be one of the sort of downfalls of the way that the current system is set up, which is that Controlled Substances Act requires there to be medical value proven in order to get off or rescheduled, right? In order to get medical value, you have to create a GMP certified synthetic. 498 of 500 full plant botanicals have failed, not of psychedelics, but in general for the FDA trials because there's too much variability. So here we have a situation where, they're like, okay, well, let's focus on psilocybin because that has the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. But just
Right.
like you're saying, like when we start getting into, just like Marinol is not the equivalent to cannabis plants. And there's so many things. There's terpenes, there's CBDA, there's THC, all the different things that are going on. And there's stuff coming out now that I hadn't even really thought of in terms of what is in the cannabis plant outside of just the marijuana. Same sort of thing. I was talking to Paul Stamets a long time ago, and he was saying that he actually, I think it's either norbaeocystine or baeocystine, one of the two other tryptamines, the lower level tryptamines in the mushroom. And he was saying that he felt just that by itself had sort of an anti-anxiety effect. So what would happen if like people are having really challenging, difficult experiences on a particular type? If somebody was able to create genetics that were, a little bit more on the baeocystine side, would that make a less anxious or, anxiety provoking? I mean, anytime you're sort of ripping yourself between dimensions from, 3D reality, these other realms, there's going to be a little bit of anxiety in there, but it's just interesting. Just like you're saying, like, what else do we know? What else can we learn about these, and how can we create, or work with mushrooms that, have a lot of these different elements that can have a different experience for you. And now I think recently there's been Oakland Hyphae and there's a couple other groups too that are doing a lot more testing, and they're not just testing for the psilocybin, but they're also testing for all the other components, which I think is just a realization probably led by the cannabis movement in terms of the varieties of different compounds that are in the plant itself. But same for the mushrooms, where we have some people say an entourage effect, or another person that works with like Oakland Hyphae calls it an ensemble effect, like they're all playing together as sort of a big sort of symphony, and I think that's really something special to be learned, and, just speaks to how little we know about these substances still, we have a long ways to go.
Right. Well, I'd love to, one of the things it comes to mind when we talk about this subject, when we were talking about, just all these different fungi and methods of consumption that have been passed down to us through different peoples and through millennia, basically, is how can we be mindful of kind of working with this subject, talking about it, learning about it, and then consuming the plant or these fungi? How can we make sure that we're being mindful of the people and the history that comes with it? If because I'm just speaking bluntly, I'm a white guy that's trying to partake in something that is often coming from other people's cultures and other people's history that my people have colonized. So how can I what suggestions do you have for maybe the sorts of things that I can learn about, or the people I can connect with, or whatever it may be, so that I can make sure that I'm kind of navigating this in a mindful and respectful way?
Yeah, that's a really important conversation that keeps coming up, and I think there's a couple different layers to it. On the first level, you want to make sure that in my opinion, you want to make sure that the endemic habitat is protected. In the conversation we've maybe spoken to about peyote in the past on the previous thing, there's this big sort of and there's not, and I think another thing to sort of consider is that there's not really a monolithic voice. So while we might say, oh yeah, we need to follow the idea of this people, some people believe you go counterclockwise in a circle. Some people believe you go clockwise in a circle. Some people believe it's a father god and in the sky, and some believe it's a mother god in the sky. So there's all these differences and nuances, even in sort of the understanding and the cosmologies and the practices and the techniques and the technologies that are coming up through these different medicines that giving one priority over another is also kind of creating the same scenario, division between groups. So I think first and foremost, in our opinion, which is why we really push for things like, being able to cultivate your own, is that we don't want, for example, people to go in and be harvesting or poaching peyote, for example, from the Huiratica lands in Mexico, which has a 5,000-year-old tradition, right? That's a long tradition. You have the Native American Church, which has about 150, 200-year-old tradition, which is really a big voice right now in terms of sort of wanting not to be decriminalizing peyote. But at the end of the day, all these plants grow from the earth. If we're believing that the earth is sort of our mother, or our father, however you want to, whichever dynamic you want to look at it, and these are gifts for us to become more conscious, to become understanding that the earth is hurting and needs healing. All these different sort of elements, we can't really be saying, well, you can't. We want to continue this punitive approach and throw people in jail because they're growing a plant, you know. And so I think we need to sort of realize that there's people and then there's plants, and really we want to come together as all people to protect the plants in their endemic habitats, to be sure that they're done in a respectful manner, to understand that there's sacredness behind the plants. Like, these are all little elements I think that are really critical, including, how do you sort of engage with them, what kind of relationships, what beings or entities are there, what are the traditional ways. But for example, here in the Bay Area, for example, the Ohlone people, who are sort of the habitants before colonization, they never had any plant or mushroom tradition. So they're like, well, this isn't really something that we want to deal with because it's not part of our culture. And so, yeah, there's mushrooms that grow all over the place here. And so really being aware of what grows locally, I think, is also really critical to help to reduce the impact of, conservation, things like that, to pick mushrooms here, to grow your own mushrooms, to grow your own cacti. There's San Pedro grows really easy out here.
Yeah.
We call Salvia divinorum in Berkeley area grows like ridiculously high, and you can kind of do it, and also listen to like warnings and things like that. So for example, from the Mazatec tradition, I know this is a plant that's not really technically illegal across the board, but a lot of people have these really intense experiences with Salvia divinorum, right? And so I talked to a couple of Mazatec curanderas, and they were saying, well, that's because Salvia is a water plant, and when we're smoking it, we're putting fire to it. So maybe don't do that, because it might be, the plant might react in a different way and give you a heavy experience that you weren't kind of expecting. But what they recommend is a quid. So you roll it up and you put like 15 to 20 leaves in your mouth, and you let them sit there for over a period of time. And then it like absorbs through your mucous membranes. And that's a much more lighter and subtle and really sort of dream-like-y kind of space that's navigable and that type of thing. So even different things like that. How do we respect the plants? How do the plants like to engage? But we need to understand that the plants then themselves are beings. And so really we're in a conversation with the plants as much as we are the cultures that have been working with them. And so there's a really interesting, I think hopefully as time moves forward, these different conversations can be had. It's understandable that there are people who want to protect their knowledge and the things that they've understood over the period of time, or what's been passed on to them. But also we have a lot of people, we hear about this in the Amazon a lot, where, sort of the woo of the Western culture, so to speak, and that a lot of the youngsters or the youth aren't really going back to their elders to learn about the plant medicines. They're getting sort of wooed into this sort of more corporate culture of sort of modernity or globalism, or whatever you want to call it, instead of getting back into the plant practices. So how do we save these traditions? How do we engage with it? How do we share with each other? Even ayahuasca itself, a lot of people, Jeremy Narby wrote once upon a time that the plants told the shamans or the ayahuasqueros to add this other plant into the thing. There's some other interesting research that was done about 5 years ago that was saying what they believe was maybe it was actually more about cultures that came together, and where their sort of their territories came together, they started sharing and trading, like with anything, right? And so one group was chewing on a Banisteriopsis copy vine, which is the MAOI inhibitor, and another had the Ananthena snuff, which is the DMT snuff. And they came together like, here, try this, and all of a sudden, wow, this whole other bigger experience came about. But they didn't learn that without sort of the innovation of these two groups coming together and sharing their insights, sharing what they knew about the plants. And so hopefully that will be how things move forward. We definitely need that as the medical moves forward, as this other sort of approaches move forward for mental health. There's still very little understanding of consciousness in general. So having these sort of cross-cultural dynamics, cross-cultural conversations around what is consciousness around outside of the reductionist materialist worldview, where everything is like embedded in 3D realm, that's it. Consciousness exists in here, not that we're swimming in it, or that there are beings, or there are realms, or all these other things. And within ayahuasca, so some ayahuasca perspectives, when you're healing, you're actually like going, I think it's the Sione. You're going up to another sort of dimension and channeling that entity to look at the person in front of you to be able to heal. So it's like that's a different paradigm than the doctor's approach, where it's like, okay, you're going to heal this, and I'm going to give you this thing, and we're good. They're actually like utilizing the knowledge from these different realms, from these different spaces, to be able to look into this realm and get insight. And I think that's a different way of looking at these experiences. And so we need to talk with each other on that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important as a part of deconstructing. I mean, we've all been a part of this, I'll call it what it is, a white Christian mindfuck for the last, 100 years. And so there's a lot to deconstruct. You know what I mean? There's a lot to deconstruct. And I think that, I don't know, man. I just think that it's a process. And I think for everyone, it's so individualized. And I think it's so important that you, like you said, that we honor these cultures and the people who have brought this to us. I mean, we have this wonderful tool in our belt now, but at the same time, we should never forget how it came to us and honor the people who gave it to us. And I think also the point you're bringing up is when we come to a place as colonizers and we genocide folks, we erase all that history of connection to the land that they're on. And so we wipe that slate clean and then we try to figure it out ourselves. And you can see the fucking mess we're in right now. It's not really that great. So it's just like honoring these traditions and these folks and letting them help us bring back what has been destroyed is an imperative thing. And I'm really liking the way this conversation is going, Larry. I mean, I really wanted to talk a lot about the activism side of it too. So I'd really like to get started with that. So kind of catch us up with what's going on with Decriminalized Nature and some of the stuff that you guys got going in the works.
Yes, sounds good. Yeah. This year has been really, really prolific for us in terms of passing things, in terms of either groups that we've helped to inspire or get started on the road, or that we've been, actively engaged with. I think last year we had 2 cities pass. One was a smaller city in Michigan, and then San Francisco as well passed. And then this year, I think there's been 6 or so cities that have passed now, 7 cities. We have, let's see, going backwards, we had Eureka, California, we had Minneapolis, Minnesota, we had Portland, Maine, we had Berkeley, California, Ferndale, Michigan, and there might have been one more. Sorry, whoever out there, if we forgot it, but that's just off the top of my head there. But what's really beautiful about that is, people have been trying different approaches. So here, a lot of the approaches have been through the city council process. But there's been an approach, for example, in Minneapolis, which is really great. We helped them out in the beginning, then they kind of like spun off on their own and did their own thing, but they went through a mayoral executive directive, basically, or, executive order. So they really only need to convince one person to change the law, rather than a whole city council, or rather than a whole, group of people that are going to be voting on a ballot initiative. They just needed that one person. So for anyone out there that has a friendly mayor or a friendly district attorney, there's other ways that we can go about this that isn't just through the council process. So that's been really great. So also this year has been sort of the year, a little bit of the pendulum swing. As you probably know, these things happen, right? Things go back and forth. And this is one of those years where, as you probably read a lot of the news recently about this pilot, and this is the first sort of, I would say, a coordinated media attack on this that we've seen since Michael Pollan started putting his books out. Right. Basically, I had the Google alerts going on, and all of a sudden, like within 2 days, it went from, pilot tries to take down plane to mushrooms. He was high on mushrooms at the time.
Yeah.
And every single article, boom, boom, boom. They're all exactly the same headline. Boom. New York Times, CNN, everything. And then you read the article, and the very bottom is like, well, he had mushrooms 48 hours before. But they, whether or not that sort of influenced him, what it did do is it assumed that he was high at the time. And that totally wasn't true, but that was parroted in every single article, and then only buried the lead to the very second to last paragraph in all those articles saying, oh yeah, it was actually 48 hours before, which he wouldn't have actually had any mushrooms in his system at that time. So little things like that you see, and Governor Newsom vetoing the bill, right? In California, which was great because we ended up passing in Eureka a week later. And so we were able to share the headline that, instead of it being Newsom vetoes mushrooms or Newsom vetoes psychedelics and it's the end of the world and nobody wants this and then a week later, Eureka passes. So Newsom vetoes, but city still passes this bill. So the benefit of doing on the city levels, we have a lot more sort of opportunity to make change happen and keep that narrative going and keep that narrative alive, whether it's the 2-year process on the state bill, which he vetoed, or these sort of shorter city level leads, which then get news in different areas. So that was really powerful. But I think that's a natural tendency, as people come through. The downside of that news outreach has been a little bit more about, look, this is why we must not have decrim. the people aren't, nobody talks about the fact it went through 10 steps before it hit Newsom, and Newsom vetoed it. They said Newsom vetoed it. People aren't ready for this. It was like it went through 10 different committees before it even got to his desk. So 10 committees thought it was okay enough to move forward. So
Yeah.
little things like that are happening, and we just got to figure out how to sort of be nimble and figure out how to sort of engage. But I think if you look at what's going on nationwide, the conversation just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah.
The downside of it is that people say, oh, well, the pilot thing, this is why we can't do decriminalization. Well, actually, I would argue the exact opposite. This is exactly why we need decriminalization, because and not to mention the fact that he flew from a criminalized place to another criminalized place. So even that whole process, technically it wasn't decriminalized for him anyway. But what we're saying is that, well, because he was a pilot, he couldn't get the support he needed. He was dealing with depression, he was dealing with bereavement, as somebody that just passed away. He was dealing with a lot of stress in his life. He hadn't slept for like 40 some hours, something like that, and he just had no support system. Probably because he felt like he couldn't talk about it because of the stigma. He might lose his job and all these other different types of things. So he got into this position where he wasn't able to sort of get the support he needed. If we had decriminalized it or had been decriminalized, there's a good argument that he might have been able to find that support. And someone's been like, hey, maybe don't get on that plane right now. Hey, let's chat a little bit more. Hey, let's settle you down before this gets too intense for you. So yeah, we're seeing some of that going on, which again is just kind of I think the natural sort of swing of things. In terms of our organization in general, we're really sort of doing great. We are really growing as an organization. Recently, a little while ago, about the beginning of this year, actually about 4 months ago, I would say, Carlos Pozzola, who's on the previous podcast with you, he ended up stepping down. He's going to be working more on some local building initiatives. So he's kind of moving in a different direction. But we have the rest of our board, which is Futsi Valadez, or Angelica Valadez, who's from the Huiratica tradition in Mexico. She's really a supporter of the decriminalization of peyote cultivation. She really brings a great voice. She does a lot of good work and has been doing good work there for a long time. Another board member, Shane Norte, who's out of Southern California. He lives on the La Jolla Reservation down there, and his people have been doing mushrooms for a really long time. He has some petroglyphs on the mountain in his reservation there that shows a man with a mushroom. So a really long tradition of mushroom work there. And then Mudu Baki, who is our other board member, and he is out of Detroit, a student of Kalindi Iis, who's also been doing really strong mushroom work for a long time, really interested in the martial arts and sort of the African traditions of mushroom work. So we have a pretty solid board. We're going to be growing a little bit. We're going to be looking for new board members and other things once we get a little settled in. But there's been a little bit of transition as we've been going through, which again has been really positive for the organization, and a lot of cities have been, excited to come and get their movement started.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the catching us up on some of the latest. So you were just talking about the board and how you're kind of bringing in folks from these different parts of the country, it sounds like, in different backgrounds. So can you talk about what it's like kind of trying to represent all these different communities, different groups of people? What are the kind of challenges that Decriminalize Nature has with reaching all these different folks, and then also trying to kind of unify the different efforts, I guess, if you will, across these different communities?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think as Shane would say from Southern California, he says, "Do it for the plants and do it for the people, and everything else will figure itself out. Keep it sacred, and it'll all fall into place." And so, really, those are kind of our those are really core ethos. There's a lot of other ethos around that. But I think our core ethos that let us know, are we on the right direction? Are we on the right path? Are we doing this in a good way? Those different types of things. And I think that's been really sort of obvious as we move forward. And, it's, not to sound cliche or too woo, but, as things start opening up, when all of a sudden it's like you're on the right path, steps just kind of come before you. So that's been really great. But it has been difficult because you have, for example, a really big voice in some of the ally adjacent organizations. Like, for example, nothing against MAPS, they're doing their thing. They've been doing their thing for a really long time. But you had that big conference that happened in Denver. I think 12,000 people showed up, like something ridiculous like that, super expensive conference, and some complaints around the local community that there wasn't any sort of funds given back to the local community to help support their initiatives out there. But, a lot of people out there have different agendas. They're seeing this as sort of cannabis 2.0. They want to sort of, make as much as they can, cut as many corners as possible.
Exactly.
Possible. And so that is, also in the same vicinity. And so I used to call it the tyranny of psychedelic science. We could also call it the tyranny of psychedelic policy, where everyone's like, oh, if you're against any policy, then you're against psychedelics, or you're this, you're creating a problem, or any of that type of thing. But like, hey, Not all policy is good policy. Not all policy is going to keep it with the people. Not all policy is going to ensure that a curandero can come up to Oregon and offer ceremony there in a really good and an integrity way without having to pay $10,000 to the state and have it recorded and all that other kind of stuff, So really, again, by saying, okay, let's decriminalize, I think that is the one approach that really can unify everybody. Okay, if we decriminalize it, okay, they're still going to have to go through their trials for the medical, but at least doctors that are maybe doing it now, they wouldn't get in as much trouble if they talk to like licensed, talk to the licensure people and all that kind of thing. And curanderos or shamans or other medicine people, a lot of companies that want to do their work here can do it without having to go ahead and pay through the state level stuff. People that have been doing this in the underground or legacy workers that have been doing this for decades, they can continue to do it without having to worry about things. So our approach really is something that can bind everyone together. The only problem is that because of sort of the interests that are involved, you always have to worry about monopolization, or you have to worry about patenting, or all these other different types of things. And those at their base are not collaborative because they're saying we own this thing. So a lot of times those folks will say, oh, Decrim, why can't you be more collaborative? Well, we can't collaborate with a monopolization format. We can't collaborate with a patent format because that by nature of it says that you own this and no one else does. And so
you can see that in cannabis a lot. Yeah, I mean, all of these lessons that the fungi community, the peyote community, all those, as those start coming online, all those lessons have been put before you in the cannabis community. And you can see where it has been an epic fail and some places where it's maybe been all right. I can only speak to what my experience here in Oregon is. And, if they continue to, I won't just say deny our access through regulation, but separate our connection to these plants and fungi in nature, I think it's a disservice to everybody.
I just want to touch on that too. I just think you're right. We spent a lot of time kind of looking at the lessons of cannabis and seeing, trying to absorb as much as we can from the ways that it's happened, the ways that people predicted it to happen, and whether it's gone that way or not gone that way. But I think, we definitely stand on the shoulders of the cannabis activists out there who have kind of gone through this process already.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I mean, there's the whole machine of, keeping boots on the ground and being active. Is this purely a passion project for you all, or is there fundraising that people can be a part of, or ways that they can support and help the cause?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're actually about ready to go into a big fundraising push towards the end of the year here. We have Giving Tuesday coming up. You can either find us if you want to donate or contribute at decriminalizenature.org. We have a new CRM that we have set up that's going to help us with some of that. So definitely, if people want to donate, we accept cash, we accept crypto, we accept whatever, volunteerism as well, And I think what we're going to start to do too is we're going to try and we want to keep our goal has always been to be decentralized, but sometimes it helps to have sort of a central core of understanding. People can kind of work together. So we're going to try and bring all the teams together in sort of massive national fundraising campaign. And we have teams now that it's really kind of amazing. The teams, as this sort of grows, where things are sprouting up, right? So obviously the West Coast is taken care of. Denver. Got a lot of movement that's going on in Arizona, New Mexico right now, which hasn't really been there before. We have a lot of movement happening in Arkansas and Alabama and Georgia, which again are places that you wouldn't really expect to be having this conversation.
Yeah.
A lot of places, obviously Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts have been doing a lot of good work there with another group called Bay Staters. Michigan's been doing really great work, but places like Illinois, for example, and we might speak about this later, but they have this thing called the CARES Act. The CARES Act, while I don't think it's going to make it through this round, but they're talking about entheogens, they're talking about all these different categories of plants and mushrooms. Even Denver or Colorado, which passed on the state level, when we started, Denver was like, hey, you can only do mushrooms because these other plants will never pass. Right. And we're like, hey, we're going to try it anyway. We're in the Bay Area. We're in Oakland, no sweat off our backs. If you don't pass, you don't pass, as before we passed anything. Right. But at least let's try and bring in the ayahuasca community. Let's bring in the DMT communities. Let's bring in the mescaline communities, cacti communities. Let's bring in the iboga communities. Right. And if you notice in the Denver bill that passed, or the Colorado bill that passed a little while ago, 122, they had the mescaline, the ibogaine, the psilocybin, psilocin, and the DMT all on the ballot initiative. And it passed with like a 55%, success rate there. So that really speaks to all the work that everyone is doing out there. And that's where sort of the, when people ask, well, where do these donations go? It goes to help these cities. It goes to, we're an educational campaign that's got activism behind it. We're letting people know, hey, these can be helpful for people. These can be beneficial. You have to do them in a good way. You have to be, sort of understanding these are really powerful medicines, but we shouldn't be going to jail for it. And so now all these different communities are getting the buzz going. And that buzz is trickling into places that maybe you wouldn't even expect to be having this conversation. So you start to see that. So we have this one little strip down the center of the US that we're still working on, some Texas difficulties, some Oklahoma difficulties. I'd love to see some South Dakota, North Dakota. We have a team that's starting there, but they're still kind of on the new edge of that. So really having to bring that education forward, but that's really what we're doing, really trying to make sure that people are sort of knowledgeable about this. We can help create that local support structure. So important, so that the city council members, the elected officials don't think that they have to create some sort of new model for everybody, but like, hey, this model already exists. Let's just let people feel comfortable doing it and having this conversation without getting arrested or stigmatized or ostracized. And so, now we have these communities that, whether or not policy passes, there's some support structures there that may not have been there before, sort of these beacons turning on in all these different places. So yeah, if you'd like to contribute, decriminalizenature.org, or you can reach out to us at info@decriminalizenature.org, and we'd be happy to get you on board with that.
Very cool. Well, thanks. Well, actually, so you were just talking about kind of the improvements that you've had across these different states and different places. Things are moving forward. So how does Decriminalize Nature celebrate and kind of appreciate those successes and achievements? Do you guys, I don't know, do you like party? I don't know. How do you celebrate these different things, but obviously keep moving along, keep things moving forward?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think for a lot of places, some places have been working on this for a really long time. So I think just the relief of passing it is kind of a big celebration. But yeah, each town locally definitely has their own little celebrations and educational events or other different types of events they have after they pass. But as an organization, I think we celebrate by helping, each city helps the next city pass.
Yeah.
Each sort of conversation that begins happening will push another city or get another news article out there that people weren't expecting to see, or opening something up in a place like Arkansas or Alabama or things like that. So that's a really big part of our celebration. We would love, and this is another thing that if anyone out there anyone out there wants to help with contributions, is we'd love to do like a national conference where we're bringing in all these different teams from Decriminalize Nature to share their perspective. We're about ready to start a new podcast, which no competition with you all, but a new podcast.
Hey, no, we're excited.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We figure we have 150 people that are leading in all these cities. They're there for a reason. So we have a very easy to access group of people in terms of getting like audiences or getting speakers on there.
Yeah.
Want to talk about why they're doing what they're doing, what are the challenges in their local town, what are their experiences like, how did it help them heal or have personal spiritual growth, or even, I know we try and avoid this word. I'm sure this has been a big issue in the cannabis realm too, this sort of idea of recreational, right? When there's so many other varieties of ways that may not be technically recreational. So like adult use, would that be a better term? I'm not really sure. But, it kind of gets us out of that medical recreational dynamic. But, it really brings people together and starts to be able to have these conversations around the sacred or the creativity or the insights or the aha moments or what is personal spiritual growth. Sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes that's not fun. I had a pretty big mushroom experiences about a week or so ago, and it was it's a tricky experience. Sometimes those are, there's blissful moments in it, but sometimes you got to see your stuff, and when you're stuff, sometimes you got to be like, all right, I got to fix that or got to work on that, and that's not always a recreational time, so to speak.
So we were just talking about successes, and I'm gonna selfishly throw in a question here as we move on to legislation. I'm gonna throw in a question about California because you were mentioning Governor Newsom. He's our governor. You mentioned Gavin Newsom earlier, and he vetoed a bill recently. Can you catch people up on something passed, he vetoed it. What was and tell us what was his hang up? Because I guess we can, let's not dwell on obviously it happened, we have to move forward. What do we have to do to now convince people? So I'd be curious, catch us up on what happened and why he didn't. What do you feel like was the disconnect there in terms of why it didn't pass?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's there's personal opinions on that, and probably the real element, or what the speculation is. Um, this bill had been watered down quite a bit in this process. Is unfortunately the case with a lot of legislation that goes through the legislators. Everyone wants to put their finger on it. Everyone wants to say, well, I'm worried about this or worried about that or whatever. So things like, for example, sharing was taken out. The limits were really small, the way that people can exchange wasn't really allowed in there. Though, the community-based element was taken out, which seems silly. Like that's how you do risk reduction, being in community and accountable for each other and that type of thing. But there was some fear that people had around that. So a lot of the bill had already been pretty watered down. I think at the end of the day, had it passed, I don't think anyone would have been upset because at least it's the starting point. But there were some elements there that might have like made it a little trickier for people to do some things. And then he, according to his statement, he says he wants it to be much more in a therapeutic model, which unfortunately is not what we want to hear because he's going the route of Oregon. He's going the route of Colorado. Colorado, I just saw recently, they are saying it's going to cost a facilitator, just a facilitator, get all the things ready to just facilitate for a year. It's going to cost them close to 52 grand. So what is that going to be in terms of the trickle down for the individuals? So unfortunately, what that means is that the same people that are were involved with the Oregon and the Denver or the Colorado initiative are also people that were lobbying Newsom and other folks in this initiative. So unfortunately, it looks like it's going in a direction that might be more controlled. At the end of the day, we're going to still need to work on the city. So that was what was really that was our celebration for his veto, which is we passed in the city a week later, and everyone had to be like, "Oh, wait a second, people are still passing. It's still about what's this conversation around decrim, blah 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 blah." So that's one thing. So other people are speculating, well, he's got big political aspirations, and he didn't want to put this on his thing, as he sort of moves on, and maybe he's going to try for different offices, that type of thing. That's also a possibility. There's a couple people out here that were. I think there's a group called Moms Against Mushrooms who had children who had a difficult accident or experience during or after, the mushroom experience. And so they sort of push back a little bit. There's risk with everything, and we certainly don't want to take away anything that happened with them and, the challenges and the grief that they're going through and all that type of thing. But, risk happens for a lot of stuff. Driving a car, taking selfies, more people have died taking selfies and all these substances combined, and so the question is, do we need to throw people in jail for this? People, we don't criminalize milk because people are lactose intolerant, so we just sort of understand, okay, these aren't for everybody. And
so I want to, then I just want to push, I guess, then it seems like the recurring like theme, I guess, or like the hang up across all these different things that we've just been talking about for almost the last hour is like safety, essentially, is like this, whether it was the pilot or whether it's Gavin from California vetoing it, it's this like notion that like mushrooms or psychedelics are like too risky and they need to be done under supervision of a professional. Is basically seems like this is kind of what people are pushing or whatever. So how do we fight that? What do you feel like is a compelling argument against that? Because if that's going to be the recurring pushback that we get when we're trying to push this legislation or make change, how do we argue against that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think the idea that these are unsafe in that regard really kind of misses a lot of stuff. We never in that conversation say, oh, this is from 2014, say like 30 million people have tried a psychedelic experience at least once. Maybe you've heard of, let's give it a huge number. Let's say you've heard of 100,000 different issues that have happened, and that's way higher than I've heard coming in the news. I would say maybe I've only heard a couple hundred, of challenges that people have had. That's a very low number. Second, I would say something like risk is relative. For somebody that is like in the throes of substance use issues or other things. I had a friend of mine that he had been sort of addicted to heroin for over 20 some years. He went to go do one of the first studies with Dr. Kitts Insane Kitts with Dr. Mash on Iboga. And I know Dr. Kitts is trying to get, Dr. Mash is trying to get the grant money, right? And so they want to make sure that the risk is like super low, because if anyone has any difficult experiences, they lose their grant money. Now, from the perspective of my friend, he's like, I'm not going to make it through this year anyway. Like, give me a chance. Let me have this opportunity. You know, I'm not gonna survive if I don't have this opportunity. So again, risk is relative. And then I think the third thing that I think a lot of people don't even really think about, because we're embedded in this pharma mindset, which is like, what, half of these, you know, SSRIs, what is it like, enough of a side effect that it has to be labeled a side effect: suicidal ideation, depression, like all
Right.
these things that they're talking about, like one or two people that have had with psychedelic experiences, but they're actually on the bottles labels. That means they've gone through the trials and showed that these are really dangerous in that regard too. And people are getting these SSRIs at, you know, pre-teen years on times.
Yeah.
And then most recently, they just found too that the SSRIs aren't even effective, because there's a study that got pushed under real quickly, real quiet, because it's bad for the multi-billion-dollar industry. Oh, serotonin and depression aren't really linked.
I saw that.
So
Yeah.
this whole industry on SSRIs is based off of science that's still uncertain.
Yeah. No,
So
totally.
yeah,
We're
so
not
when sort
treating the
of
actual
link all those things
cause.
up, then we really need to be starting to think about what is.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just
Yeah,
saying we're not
exactly,
treating the actual
yeah.
cause of like the issue.
And
Yeah.
even just
Looks like there's a delay. Sorry about that. JR, do you want to jump in
yeah,
with
it
the
sounds
next?
like my internet is a little slow.
No worries.
Yeah, so the thing that kind of hit me as we were kind of talking about this, are we there? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead, JR.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, Sam, your video's froze on my end, sorry. And Larry, you went away too, so it might be on my end. Sorry about that. But anyways, we were next kind of talking about, you know, rule changing and legislation. And one of the things that I saw that Berkeley did is they made this its lowest priority for their law enforcement as a policy. Can you kind of talk about that? Because we always talk about, you know, what really matters is what your local law enforcement feels about what you're doing. And so, can you talk about making low priorities as a city ordinance or as a process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how all the cities are doing it. So this is how Oakland did as well. There's a combination of both lowest law enforcement priority, but also a sort of a I know this term is kind of a trigger for some folks, but a defunding of any arrest, persecution, or investigation related to entheogenic plants and fungi. And the reason that we have to do that on the city level is because we can't really conflict with state law. But exactly what you're saying, state troopers aren't knocking on your door saying, "Are you growing mushrooms out there?" Most of the time. It's usually local law enforcement, and those are the people that you want to be, you know, connecting with, building relationships with, whether it's local law enforcement, whether it's a district attorney who'd be prosecuting the case. Those are the people that we want to address on the local level. Now, after a city passes, it's possible to move up to then the county and then to the state. So we're building power as we go up. So, okay, we get the local law enforcement on board, which all the cities that have passed have been on board with this. You know, they always say we got better things to do than bother someone that's growing mushrooms, right? And then what happens next is you go up to the county level. So in Jefferson County, Washington, so Port Townsend is a city that passed there. Then they moved up to the county level, which now includes the unincorporated spots. So one thing that's a bit of a challenge is that when we do the city level lowest law enforcement priority, it's only for incorporated cities. So if you're in a rural area, it doesn't like reach out to that. So then we have to go to the county level to cover the larger area. So the couple different counties we have are Jefferson County, Washington, Washington County, Michigan, and we have maybe Humboldt County will be joining pretty soon. They have Arcata and Eureka now both passed in that county. So hopefully we're going to try and move some county level stuff up there. But that gets tricky when you start to do like Marin, for example. There's a lot of places like Bolinas and other places that aren't incorporated, which obviously have a big, long, strong community there of psychedelic folks. So that's what the county level would help with. But yeah, keeping on the city, keeping on the county, keeping it local, I think is really the way to go. Once you start getting into state level stuff or federal level stuff, there's so much money in terms of lobbying. There's so many agendas that are trying to be pushed. There's so many people that want to get their fingers on things that oftentimes you sort of miss out on the people, which is really what we're fighting for.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's cool. I agree. And so, do you see states' rights still prevailing and kind of being the thing that keeps the federal law at bay, or do you see this federal kind of shift and maybe attempt to kind of rule all, I guess you might say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess again, this is where we're going to be having to keep an eye on what's going on with cannabis. It seems like for cannabis, I mean, I think Ohio was the most recent one that passed, right? Which is a pretty big move, just because Ohio has got sort of the history that it does, the political sort of approach that it does. So I think the state level stuff, and you kind of see that. I mean, they're still dawdling, they're still dragging their feet. I don't even think Biden has let out those 4,000 prisoners yet that he said he was gonna. That he made a big hurrah about for personal possession on the federal level. But yeah, I think the state level stuff will be helpful. I think that, I don't see there being a lot of money or resources coming towards this, and even cities are pushing it a little bit. We're seeing in even cities that haven't decriminalized, places where, they're selling mushrooms at dispensaries. But then you do have this pendulum swing. So, for example, these folks in Vancouver, this is a different country, of course, but same idea. I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's all these mushroom stores in Vancouver that were open that were selling a variety of different psychedelics and things like that. They got all their mushroom, and that was sort of the fourth element in this pendulum swing with Newsom vetoing, with this pilot issue. Then all of a sudden, all these mushroom dispensaries got raided in Vancouver. But then they're back to it the next day, filling their store back up. So it's like the Sisyphus, right? You keep pushing that boulder up the hill and it's going to roll back down again. It's like, it's at some point in time, it's just going to be too hard for them to come after, and they don't have the resource to do it. I mean, we have enough things that we're worrying about. There's wars going on all over the place. There's economic issues going on. Who has the money for going after somebody with plants and mushrooms is our hope. If things start shifting or changing, then we're going to have to figure that out as a larger community. What do we do? How do we make sure to do this safely? How do we sort of engage with stronger policies in our area? But again, I think cannabis seems to be the thing that would be maybe first to see that pressure, and then we'll just sort of have to dance with it as it comes along.
So
yeah, it's gonna be interesting how things kind of shake down.
So our last kind of question on or one of our last questions on the activism front. So how can folks get involved on their local level? So for me, I see in my town, I also live in Northern California, but the way that you make change is through that city council. So I might have to find my city council member that represents my area of town or whatever. Do I just start having the conversation with them, or how can I really, if I want to be effective at this, how can I be most effective at making change?
Yeah, I would think that, first and foremost, I would say reach out to us. It's definitely helpful to give sort of the guidance. We have like an organizer handbook. You can find us at decriminalizenature.org or info@decriminalizenature.org. From that organizer handbook, we have a lot of different sort of templates that people can use. We helped people put together a resolution, and we even give you like the next steps. Okay, yeah, what's your city council look like? How do you analyze your city council members? How do you engage with them? What's the best way to get a meeting with them? How do you go into city council and give public comment if needed? How do you present the resolution? What things do you be aware of? What are the key elements in the resolution that are sort of, we have to have these things there no matter what, even if they try and sort of cut it out, make sure that these elements are in there. So there's probably about 10 or 15 steps. Another side of that is also in terms of building community locally and building that infrastructure. So I put sort of those two things together. But Sam, if you want to reach out, or JR, or JR is in Oregon. So, but even we have teams in Oregon that are still working because we can't cultivate in Oregon. People out there can't cultivate mushrooms in Oregon. So we'd love to help you out with that too. We have a team in Bend. We have a team in Portland. We have a team forming in Eugene. So, there's definitely some other support there as well. But for any of your listeners that are out there, if you're in your spot, start to kind of get a sense of, what does this look like on a city council? Maybe do like some analysis, see, does this look possible? Or there may be people that, do I know somebody that knows somebody? Those always make things go through a little faster. And then reach out to us. And like you say, we probably now helped, supported, or influenced 25 to 26 different cities that have decriminalized, 2 counties as well, influenced statewide policy as well. So the template seems to work. City council members seem to like to hear that other things positive happen in other places, and here's the process that went through, and here's all the stuff that didn't happen that they think might have happened. So we actually help, and we'll meet up with city council members as well, give them a lowdown. We'll meet up with the police chief, because that's always something that people need a little bit. It's always good to have a big team when you go meet the police chief, because everyone's like, oh, okay, what's going to happen here, right? And not always that they're on our side, but after education, I think a lot of them are in support. Even we had a great meeting with some district attorneys in Columbus, Ohio, not too long ago. And Columbus is more of the liberal spot in Ohio, but they were really open to listening. They had heard about the research before. They're interested. So you just never know. I say a lot of times, sometimes probably some city council members have had their own experiences, but they can't present it themselves. So they're just waiting for their community to ask them. So you'll find some cities that it's just all of a sudden you go from like, this isn't going to happen till you find the person that's ready or that knows somebody or has heard the research, and boom, you're just accelerating that process. So, but definitely we're here to help give you any kind of guidance. That's kind of what we do. And that's, again, where some of those contributions go to, is make sure that we can support you on the local level.
That's so good, Larry. I'm so glad that we have this conversation, because I think a lot of this is shaken down for a lot of folks, and the time and the opportunity is now. And we always kind of like to do kind of a final question. And mine is kind of with us all existing in this time of complete with madness right now. What do you see us as humans? What can we do to find center, balance, and some peace, love, and understanding?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I had that question, if I knew the answer to that, we'd be doing really well, right? Yeah, I mean, and I think there's an element of polarization that's happening right now, where there's so many dynamics. Like, everyone wants to attack everything everyone's saying, and I think, one thing that I think these experiences help us with, especially if you look at sort of, ecological stuff, helping us reconnect with the earth, realizing these sacred plants grow out of the earth. Like, that's a really huge thing, that helps us to get settled into that. Realizing that we're all connected, we're all human beings on the same planet, we're all family, in some degree, and to realize that, I think, is really huge, because now all of a sudden you're not willing to destroy, kill, violence, all that kind of stuff that happens, and we're seeing out there. I mean, the war machine is a big entity, and that's one thing that we're also having sort of battle up against right now. So, stress and grief and depression and all these other mental health issues that people are seeing are really just a byproduct of us not feeling connected, not understanding sort of the nature of the human experience, not understanding the largeness of consciousness. All these different types of things, I think, can be definitely helped by some of these, mushroom and plant experiences. Now, of course, we still need to do the change. And I think that's where we go from the meaning making of this experience. And this is what I work with on my other stuff, is the nonprofit for ERIE, which is Entheogenic Research, Integration, Education. We make the meaning of the experience. Like, what did that mean? What was going on? And then how do we apply those insights? And if we're all applying those insights, we lose our apathy, we lose our hopelessness, we lose our inability to feel like we have any sort of, say in what's going on there. And on the local level, we definitely do. And that's what we're seeing over and over and over again. So get out there, make the change happen, engage with each other, bring community together, build that sort of grassroots power structure. And that'll help sort of hopefully topple some of the more challenging stuff that's going on in the world.
Beautiful. Thanks, Larry. I appreciate that. It was great having you back. And anytime you want to come back on and drag somebody in here with us, go ahead, feel free. I mean, we would love to open this platform to you and anyone you'd like to bring on. Yeah, and we really do appreciate your time. So again, just kind of let people know where people can find you and get in touch with Decriminalize Nature, and how maybe they can get active in their own community.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'd love to bring on some of the other board members. I know we're going to try to do that for this round, but just been a busy week for me. But I'd love to do that in the future and sort of get some of these other voices out there. If you want to connect with us, you can, like I said, go to our website, which is decriminalizenature.org. Our Instagram is at Decriminalize Nature, Facebook as well. We're not on X or Twitter as much as normal, but if you want to go find us there, it's at Decriminature, a little bit of a shorter handle there. Or contact us on our email at info@decriminalizenature.org.
Beautiful.
It's been really great. Thank you guys for having me on and for the great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And sorry for the internet connections. I think maybe it was on my end or everyone's end. I couldn't tell what was going on, but thank you for hanging out with us, and thanks for the viewers for getting through it with us as well. Of course, it's the internet, so things always happen every once in a while. But thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Thank you so much to our supporters, everyone who's been hanging out in the CannaBuzz chat. We had some live viewers that tuned in with us today, which is awesome to see them. we will be giving away a hat from our friends at Lost Coast Plant Therapy. So huge thanks to Dirk from Lost Coast Plant Therapy .com. Also, shout out to TikiSeeds.com and Neptune Seedbank. We really appreciate all of the support and helping make the show possible. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to support Decriminalize Nature. Check out Larry's site and get involved. It's really important. I really appreciated this conversation because just like we were talking about in the show earlier, we've seen these topics kind of be taken over by these rich people from Silicon Valley that are basically just looking at this as another like CBD or thing that they can make tons of money off of. And we really need to make sure that when we're moving things forward, that we're bringing everyone along with us and that we're doing so in a respectful way. And this is just really important conversation. So thank you so much to Larry. Thank you so much for everyone's time. And we'll see you in the next one. And as always,
growers love.